Hey guys, Fox here, and today it is time for my 2025 UFL Week 8 Power Rankings. Now, this past week was honestly one of the more expected weeks. Pretty much everybody who makes game picks got at least like 3 of them right. There really wasn't any major upset whatsoever. It was just kind of the basic teams ended up winning, which is wild for how the season's gone. Now, granted, one of the games was insane with how a team ended up winning. Overall, though, this week kind of just reinforced what most people believed about these teams. So we're going to be looking at, of course, the power rankings, as this is the first week in a very long time where we basically have almost no change. Only 2 teams changed spots from last week to this week. And a lot of that is because I kind of predicted my rankings last week pretty well. But we'll also be talking about the path to the playoffs for every single team in the league. Now, 2 of those teams don't have a path anymore, which I'll talk about. So let's get right into it with number 8, the San Antonio Brahmas. No shock here. They stay at number 8. Yes, this was overall a close game against DC. This was Teamu's best game at quarterback, and they still were able to keep it close. But as they pointed out in the broadcast, eliminate the 2 games against DC where they put up 24 in each game. The amount of points they've scored this season is horrific. Hell, if you eliminate the Michigan game as well, you're talking about a 9-9, 3-3 as your scores on offense. Yikes. Look, there's not much to talk about this team. They are, by far, the worst defense in the league. They have allowed more points than anyone else by a decent margin. They have the most yards allowed as well. There is only like one other team with over 300, but there's no one as bad as San Antonio. Then offensive yards per game. They're worst in the league in that aspect. Third down percentage. They're worst in the league. Yes, there's other stats that they're okay in, but when those 3 stats, you are really 4 stats, you're just last in, you're a lot like the Showboats last year, which means that you're just objectively a bad team because there's nothing really good about them. That's the thing. People can talk about certain guys being stuck on here. We, at pretty much no point in the season, looked at guys like Kirkland or McFarland being like, yeah, they remind us of last year's performers. At least with like the Showboats last year, you saw a couple of players like David Davis, like Vinny Papale playing well. You can argue that there's almost nobody aside from a couple linebackers on this team that are really playing well at all. It is really sad to see, especially because of how good a team they were last year. But man, this year's Brahmas team, it was rough. So number 8, it's going to stay the Brahmas. I don't think they did enough to justify moving up. The fact is especially my opinions on DC and St. Louis and how they've played all season, Memphis, I think, is a better team than San Antonio. We will see, of course, we have the second Tank Bowl of the season this upcoming week on Friday between the Showboats and the Brahmas, which I will be streaming that game. So be on the lookout for that one. Now, as for their path to the playoffs, they're already eliminated, right? They are one of the 2 teams eliminated. Them and the Showboats both headed into this week with identical ways to miss the playoffs this week, which is essentially if the 2 teams with 4 wins won and you lost, you were out because you'd have 6 losses. You couldn't get to 5 wins, which happened for San Antonio. So yes, San Antonio has been eliminated from the playoffs. So for those of you who are returning viewers from last year, of course, be on the lookout for my 2 eliminated from the playoffs videos. And if you're new, be on the lookout for those 2 videos as well, where I go more in-depth on the team missing the playoffs. Now, number 7 is the Memphis Showboats. Again, no change here, no change needed. Why move them up or down? There's pretty much no argument. Now, yes, I know some people might legitimately move them up just because a certain team blew an insane lead, which you could easily justify moving them insanely down. Look, this team is really good compared to what they were last year. This year, just not as much. Look, they kept pretty much every game close. This last game against St. Louis is one of their weaker performances overall. When you look at them in the season, they've kept so many games close, and they came so close to winning a lot of them. The Week 1 game against Michigan, that final score doesn't indicate how close it was. It only became that score because they threw a pick 6 in the potential game-winning drive. The DC game, 5 points. Houston Roughnecks, they got the extra point attempt. They did win an OT against Birmingham. Houston, again, insanely close game. This team, despite the issues they've had, have kept it close. Let's call it like it is. The biggest reason this team is not in the playoff race right now is that turnover differential. Even with getting another one against St. Louis, they're still at 2 takeaways across the entire season. That's a negative 10 turnover differential when you consider how many giveaways they have. That's why they're not legitimately like a winning team. Because if they had better turnover stats, they'd be great. Their defense, despite not getting many turnovers and sacks, are in the middle of the pack in a lot of points allowed in yard stats, which actually shows that it's a good unit. It's just not getting the turnovers they need. Third down percentage is rough, and that also hurts them. but it's mainly that turnover differential. If you were to say that they get one extra drive or don't lose a drive against Michigan, against DC, Houston again, they might have won all those games. But instead, they didn't. So they're number 7. They are better than San Antonio because of the fact that they've at least been competitive in pretty much every game this season. Pretty much, not literally, of course, the Michigan game, but the second Michigan game. But for the most part, they've been competitive. San Antonio, they've had a couple of games that are competitive and the rest were bad. Again, this could change this Friday when they play each other, but as of now, number 7 is the Showboats. Now, just like the Brahmas, their path to the playoffs is non-existent. They have already been eliminated. Now, when I do my Miss the Playoffs video for them, it's going to be a lot different than last year's, because this year, it's just a sad story. This is a team that is so much better than that team last year. And if these two teams played each other, the 24 versus the 25 Showboats, this team would win by probably 20. It's just a shame that they blew so many close games. Not even blew, they just weren't able to win those close games. They were always fighting from behind. The quarterback issues with the inconsistency of E.J. Perry and T. Will just really hurt them. But number 7, Memphis. Coming in at number 6 is the Arlington Renegades. Now, the Renegades stay at 6, and I think that this is deserved. Look, the game against Michigan went exactly as I predicted it would. I said in my Game Picks video that they would somehow cover the 3-point spread but still lose. When you pull that off, when you're able to predict that a team keeps it insanely close and still loses, that says that there is a fundamental flaw with their team. Again, 2 straight seasons, this team has blown so many winnable games. This is another one. The Panthers fumbled it twice in really solid field position, so Arlington was able to get some of those free points and still couldn't close it out. That final defensive drive, just like the Birmingham one, yes, I know obviously the false start happened, but just like the Birmingham one, when it mattered most, the team disappeared, right? Against DC, they got the interception, couldn't score, or hell, couldn't even drive 10 yards down the field, really. Birmingham allowed the game-winning touchdown. Against Michigan, allowed the game-winning touchdown. Because, again, people can complain all they want. The fact is, the more you watch it, the more you realize that Perkins was obviously down with a second left, and it was ruled a first down, meaning the clock did stop anyway. You had 2 chances to stop them, to either 1, win the game, or 2, force OT, and you couldn't do it. That's because you guys weren't good enough. Because for some reason, this team, I DM'd somebody about this. This team has this innate ability to, no matter who they play, make them look trash, and then still find a way to lose, because for 58 minutes, they will be the better team, and the final 2 minutes or 3 minutes, they'll just disappear and lose. They've done that so many times the last 2 seasons. I gave them the benefit of the doubt last year, and I moved them up to 4 in the power rankings. But this year, nah. I moved you straight down after your loss last week, and guess what? Now you're still at 6. I don't think there's really, again, I know some people are going to say that a certain other Texas team should be ranked below them. That other Texas team, at least they've been competitive, and when they lose, they've had 1 choked lead. Arlington's had about 4 this season. Pretty much every loss they have, they choked. And even their wins aren't impressive. The Houston win, unimpressive as hell. That was the game Anthony Brown pretty much played the most time in, and they nearly pulled off the W. And the St. Louis win, you got an 8-point hand. We talk about handicaps and all that. You got an 8-point handicap from a dude tearing his Achilles and fumbling the ball. Yes, there's a big difference from a pick 6 versus a dude tearing his Achilles and giving you a touchdown. Okay? So you eliminate that, the Battlehawks win that game. So your 2 of your 3 wins are unimpressive at all. Granted, Houston's wins are against Memphis and San Antonio, but your only good win as Arlington was against San Antonio in week 1. So number 6, I feel like, is deserved. Yes, your defense is really good. Yes, your third down percentage is really good. But how come you're 3 and 4? Shouldn't you be in the playoffs? Odds are you're going to miss it because of the fact you keep blowing all these games. Number 6 has to be Arlington, in my opinion. They were pretty, to me, the more I thought about it last week, the easier it was to justify putting them at 6. Other people didn't. They put them higher. Like, I saw as high as like 3 for them. They showed us what they really were this week. They blew another game they had no excuse to lose. So number 6, Arlington. And now, as for their path to the playoffs, it is pretty tough. Now, remember, St. Louis and DC play each other in week 10. So Arlington needs one of them to fully lose out, and they need to beat DC and San Antonio. That's it. Their game against Memphis, in a vacuum, barely matters. What they really need is to win their 2 conference games to get that divisional record to 4-2. That way, if St. Louis or DC loses out, their divisional record is 3-3. If you win out, you will be obviously tied head-to-head 1-1 against either of them. But then if the next tiebreaker is conference record, which you will beat them at, that's how you make the playoffs. But again, that Week 10 game against DC or DC versus St. Louis is what could screw the whole thing over. Because if, let's say, DC loses to Arlington this upcoming week, and then they lose in Week 9, but then they get the W against St. Louis in Week 10, you're screwed. You missed the playoffs anyway. Because of the fact that you're stuck here again, the Memphis game can help you, obviously. It's just not necessary, right? Yes, easiest method is to win out, and then you have DC or St. Louis just lose their conference games. But the best way is to beat DC and San Antonio, because those are 2 games you need. You can beat DC and Memphis, and odds are you'll still miss the playoffs. And it's still possible based on tiebreakers and all that, because of point differential and all the other tiebreakers. But overall, what you really need to do is beat DC and San Antonio and have St. Louis or DC lose out. That's your best path to the playoffs if you're Arlington. Now, coming in at number 5 is going to be the Houston Roughnecks. It was so tough not moving them down really far. They blew a 19-point lead. I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. But the bottom line is they're still the second best team in point and turnover differential. Their defense, or their offense isn't great, but their defense is still an okay-ish unit. Points allowed wise, but yards allowed, it's pretty poor. But the biggest thing is that Jalen McClellan is still one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Again, even though this week, the second half especially really didn't showcase anything, I just can't justify putting them below Arlington. The fact is, when you look at their season as a whole, it's more impressive than Arlington. Arlington choking away all these games, whereas Houston, they've choked away one game legitimately. But overall, the way you view it is, if this team had McClellan at QB for the whole season, there's a good chance that they're, a winning team. Versus the Renegades, which have been playing their best overall talent and still really aren't doing anything. So because of that, begrudgingly, I'm putting Houston at 5. I know some people are going to put them at 6, and I know some might even put them lower because, in fact, they did blow the largest lead in UFL history. But the record before that was by Arlington. And overall, when you compare how they played in Week 2 versus now, that Week 2 Renegades team is basically the same team it is now. This Houston team, even with this blown lead, is still a much better team they were in Week 2. Again, this team, it's just been a lot of injuries. As soon as you get healthy in the defensive backs, Kirk Mayer gets hurt again. So your ground game takes a shot. Now, yes, Zaquandre White had a solid game in the first quarter, but overall, it's just, I'm putting him at 5. I wouldn't be against you moving him down lower. It's just when I compare him to Arlington, Arlington is just a team that pisses me off when I watch them in a totally different way. Because when that Michigan drive happened, I always had that feeling that Michigan had a chance to win it because of the fact that Arlington has choked so many of those games in the last 2 years. So, number 5, giving it to Houston. As for the path to the playoffs for the Houston Roughnecks, it's actually insanely simple. Win out. If you win out, you make the playoffs. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I know that might sound shocking, but it's true. They control their own destiny still. Because you have Michigan twice, you beat them twice, head-to-head record, you have the advantage, meaning all you have to do is have the same record of them overall. If you beat DC, you finish the season at 6-4. You beat Michigan twice, the most wins they can have is 6 if they beat Birmingham in Week 9. So that's all you have to do, win out. Now, yes, that's a tough ask, but there's other ways to make the playoffs as well. If you beat Michigan twice and Michigan loses to Birmingham, you'll still beat them on tiebreaker. But if you're Houston, need to win out, because winning out is the only way you can get above Birmingham in the playoffs. If Birmingham finishes the season 0-3 and you go 3-0 to end the season, you'll jump them in the standings and make the playoffs over them. So the USFL, you can still have any combination of those 3 teams make the playoffs, and it basically just comes down to Houston. Win out, you're in the playoffs. No ifs, ands, or buts. That simple. Now, coming in at number 4 is going to be the DC Defenders. The Defenders come in at number 4, and really shouldn't be too shocking here. You move up one spot. I still don't trust this team whatsoever. Again, this was Teamu's best game by far, and it was still a close win against San Antonio. The fact that that was him at his peak form and you still only won by one score is very scary to me. That makes me a non-believer. I said it last week. This team has been getting a bit overrated because their defense is still falling off a cliff, right? Yes, in theory, this was improvement from the fact they've been allowing more points every week. But again, San Antonio, the first week they had Party as the guy calling plays, they did well against Michigan. Since then, and before then, the only other 2 times they scored more than 20 points were against DC, and one of them on the punt return. That's not good. When you're DC, your points allowed is now second worst in the league, and your yards per game is getting to that 300 per game. Yes, you're still in the lead in yards per game, but it's just by a smidgen over Michigan. Turnover differential, you're still the best in the league, but again, it's not as dominant as it would have been earlier. Passing yards game, you're first, but a lot of that's just turnovers. Third down percentage, you are up there, but again, that's another stat you've been going down on. You used to be number 1, now you fell to 2, now you fell to 3. I just can't put this team any higher. I really can't see how people can justify this team at 2 after the last few weeks, because this defense just continues to kind of spiral in a way that's bad. I mean, Kevin Hogan was dicing this team up for a decent amount of that game. It's just, I don't find how you can really put this team at like number 2. The fact is, for how much of a concern a couple of players on offense are for St. Louis defense is a much better unit than this DC team right now, and it's not even really that close. So number 4, DC defenders, they move up 1 spot, not really because of anything they did, but because of the fact that Houston choked. Like, if Houston had played that similar game, no, if Houston had won, obviously they would have stayed, and DC would have, moved up above Birmingham, but DC number 4, I think this is a pretty easy spot for them, but that's my thoughts. Now, their path to the playoffs is win a game and Arlington loses a game. That's it. If Arlington, so they can basically clinch this week, obviously, against Arlington. If they beat Arlington, they make the playoffs. Because that jumps you to 6 wins, that jumps them to 5 losses. That's what it comes down to in this aspect, is just that, your overall record. You get to 6 wins and they get to 5 losses, you make the playoffs because there's no way they can catch you. So, it's that simple. Now, their best bet, obviously, is week 8 or 9. Week 10, yes, is at home, but really, DC is a very, very easy path to the playoffs, all things considered, because they can just end it right now by beating Arlington. And if they do lose, guess what? You get Houston. So you get to play one of the weakest home crowd in the league. So your home field advantage that you don't have in that game doesn't even matter because it's in Houston. It's basically a neutral site stadium. And then you just beat Houston then. Congrats. You make the playoffs if Arlington just loses a game. So that's their path to the playoffs. Yes, obviously there's other tiebreakers that can happen because if you end up losing to Arlington, then you have the same record there. Then it's a matter of beating St. Louis to make sure you finish the season with a 5-2 or a 4-2 divisional record. The best way is to just win a game and Arlington loses. Coming in number 3 is the Birmingham Stallions. Once again, they stay in the same spot. Again, Houston blew a 19-point lead. Birmingham made this great comeback. Yes, that drive at the end of the half was one of the worst things you'll ever see. The fact they got a touchdown on that drive is insane. It was all because of that DPI penalty. Skip, that's my biggest question. Some people are going to put this team at 2. I can't. Their offensive play calling is really sketchy all of a sudden. That drive at the end of the first half, they essentially had roughly they had about 17 to 30 seconds left during this whole era. They had multiple timeouts left. They were at like a 2nd and 2, and they kept running plays out of 5 wide. I don't know if Skip realized this, but if you get a first down, the clock stops and allows you to spike the ball and lose like 2 seconds or do anything. And he had timeouts, yet for some reason he basically never ran it till it was insanely obvious, and it just happened to work. Basically, he failed upwards in that final drive. He made mistake after mistake as a play caller and a coach, yet they got rewarded for it, right? The Cliff Kingsbury of play calling, right? How Cliff Kingsbury, of course, failed upwards in his coaching career for a while when he got that head coaching job with Arizona. Similar to that with this drive for Skip Holtz. Played it terribly, and they got a touchdown. Then they scored right after the half, then they kept scoring, and in the end, they won the game. Incredible win. But, I mean, I can't really look at this team and be like, yeah, this team is the top 2 team in the league. Because, again, they've played 5 quarterbacks this season. Case Cookus went down. Jamar finished the game. He had a very similar moment to his 2022 Week 1 game against the Generals, but overall, it's rough because their defense is great. Their defense is technically like the best unit in the league. I think St. Louis is better, which is another reason I have St. Louis above them. Points allowed, they're number 1. Yards per game, they're a bit under St. Louis. Overall, though, it's a really good unit, but their turnover differential is another issue. They're -3, which is second worst in the league. Again, really, Memphis is by themselves at -10, but Birmingham is, of course, one of the 2 weakest teams in that aspect. I just can't put them above St. Louis. I think that St. Louis's issues are somewhat easier to fix, whereas Birmingham's, when it's about injuries, it's like, man, yes, if Magoo comes back, is that really going to do anything? Because then he'll be back from an injury, and the last time we saw him play terribly. Whereas St. Louis, it's if Max Duggan and Sailors play a little bit better, this team is almost unbeatable. Whereas Birmingham, it's like, if their play calling gets better, if they get healthy, if their defense keeps playing the way it is. Number 3, Birmingham. Path to the playoffs, identical to DC in the USFL. Win a game, Houston loses. Same thing. Just get to 6 wins, they get to 5 losses. That's all you need. That happens, you make the playoffs. So, yes. Now, their last 3 games, yes, St. Louis, at St. Louis, and then Michigan is a tough 2 of 3 games. But at Memphis, that's a game you could win. Again, Memphis is basically just playing with house money at this point. But overall, it's the same thing as Houston. You win a game and Houston loses, they fall to 5 losses, you get to 6 wins. There's physically no way for them to come back. That simple. Number 3, Birmingham Stallions. Number 2, the Battlehawks. I know a lot of people are going to say this team should be lower. I still don't buy it. I had them at 2 last week. I thought it was pretty obvious they were the second best team. They weren't as good as Michigan, but they weren't, a third team. And I'm keeping it here. The fact is this defense is too damn good. This is, I would say, the best overall defense in the league. The fact is this defense has played very well pretty much the entire season. You have the number 1 sack leader in PETA. You have the best punt net average, no random stat, but you're number 1 in that. Rushing yards game, you're still number 1. Now, yes, the biggest issue with this team is, of course, Jacob Sailors and Max Duggan. Sailors just hasn't been his, first 3-week form the last couple of weeks. If he can revert to that form, this offense will be much better. And Duggan is still a very weird quarterback. He's really not that good, but he's not terrible. He's not one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, but he's nowhere near the best. Again, if him and or Sailors play 20% better, this team is a much better team. Yes, they beat Memphis by 10. Not an insanely convincing win. But you have Rodrigo Blankenship, the best kicker in the league. When you have a kicker that you can basically count on to guarantee you 3 points, it's a big deal. A lot of these other teams don't have that. Right? When BT Potter made his long kick, it was a shock. We've seen a lot of these other kickers where when they miss, it's you hate to see it, but you're not stunned by it. When Hot Rod hasn't missed a kick yet. So what it comes down to is this team still has a ton of talent. It's just a matter of Duggan playing a little bit better, being a bit more consistent, getting that completion percentage up to about 60. I'm not asking for him to be an elite passer, but if he gets that to about 60% and gets that passing yards a game up a bit more too, because that yards per game is also a bit different because certain appearances obviously pulled it down. But if he can just get a little bit better, move that passer rating to 60, get that passer rating to about 80, 85, this team will be much better. Take some fewer sacks. I know most of the sacks are against Arlington both times. And as for Sailors, just play a little bit more well on the ground than what you were the past couple of weeks. But number 2, St. Louis. Back to the playoffs. Again, identical to DC. All these ones are pretty simple. Win a game, Arlington loses. That happens, you make the playoffs. That's simple. So can they do it? They can. Will they do it? We'll see. But that's all you need if you're St. Louis. You win 1 game and then Arlington loses. You make the playoffs again. You hit 6 wins. They hit 5 losses. No way for them to come back. You make the playoffs. Number 1 is the Michigan Panthers. No shock here. No real argument against this team. They have the MVP in Bryce Perkins. Again, this was probably one of his weakest performances, and he still had a great game against the Renegades compared to what we see normally. Now, their giveaways is tied for the weakest, or tied for the least in the league, which is a great stat to be. Yes, their turnover differential isn't great, but they're not turning it over that much, so it's not really affecting them too much. Yards per game, again, they're right behind DC. Third down percentage, they're the best in the league. Basically, once this team started, A, running with Perkins, and B, playing Tawa, it's been like this unstoppable unit. The reason why I'm fine with them going for 1 all the time is because they have this 1-2 punch at QB and RB that is so tough to defend. The Renegades knew that they were going to run with Tawa, and they couldn't stop it at the end of the game. That just shows that you have a better O-line and you have a better RB and QB duo. In terms of running back quarterback duo, it's not just the best in the league, it's the best in the league by a country mile. Because you can legitimately argue. Now, the argument depends on how much you count for the receiving game. But there is an argument that they have the number one running back and quarterback in the league right now, which is insane. And Tawa is top 3, unarguable. It's just a matter of do you put him at 1, 2. But Perkins is the best QB in the league. This 1-2 punch is insane. Again, Perkins is the only quarterback above 100 passer rating. Second place is 91.1. He's at 108.7. He's only thrown 2 interceptions. Yes, he's fumbled a ton. He's fumbled a lot, and a couple of them are just him not carrying the ball. That's the one concern, along with him hurdling all the time, is that he's not protecting the ball. But he's gotten pretty lucky, right? He fumbled it once into the end zone. But overall, they're the best team in the league. That demolishing of DC, and the fact that the St. Louis loss was because of that one drive with Danny Etling. It's pretty hard to argue this team anywhere else but one. Again, they need to beat Houston, and they make the playoffs because that's their path to the playoffs. Beat Houston, you're in. Simple as that. Like, I put win a game, Houston lose a game because it's true. In all honesty, just beat Houston once. You play them 2 of the last 3 weeks. You get 1 W. It doesn't even matter what the Birmingham game is, aside from, home field advantage. You just got to beat Houston. You beat Houston, you make the playoffs. It's guaranteed. That simple. Now, again, their path to the 1 seed is obviously themselves. They control their own destiny in that aspect. Because if they go 3-0 to end the season, they'll finish 5-1 in their conference record, and that'll put Birmingham at best 4-2. So will they do it? We'll see. But number 1, it's the Panthers. Not much to say. Overall, that'll do it. This has been ZomFox. Let me know down below what your power rankings are. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to be notified to upload any videos if you enjoyed this video. Again, we're getting closer and closer to the end of the season. Trying to hit at least 1,200 subscribers by the end of the season. Maybe we hit 1,250. Again, I will be streaming the Friday Night Football game, the Tank Bowl, I should say, between the Brahmas and the Showboats. We'll have a vote out on for the other game we'll stream this weekend. Again, I'll have my 2 eliminated/missed the playoffs videos coming this week for the Showboats and the Brahmas, as well as week review and game picks. Be looking for all those, and as always, guys, have a great night.